Hi, and welcome to the Navigating the Wilderness podcast. My name is Nicole Delaney, and today I am joined by a very special guest, Shelley Jones. Welcome to the podcast, Shelley.
Thank you so much.
And Shelley is a master's level graduate from Jerusalem University College, and she used to be the director of student services, and she was also an instructor of short-term programs as well as long-term programs at Jerusalem University College. And that is actually where I met Shelley in the summer of 2023.
Yes.
She was my instructor for
Woohoo!
first 3 weeks. I was at the college. I was there for 5 weeks, and actually a little over 3 weeks because I was with you in Jordan as well.
Right.
And Shelley was leading the class, the historical and geographical settings of the Bible. And I just really appreciated you as an instructor for a number of reasons. One being, when I went into Israel, I had very little understanding of maps of the Bible. I mean, I'd looked at maps and things, and
Right.
I actually have my stack of maps sitting right here.
Yes. It warms my heart to see
Right.
that.
From our class. But I remember we had that map project before I even went to Israel. I think it was maybe 40 hours of map, like,
Yeah. It's
of-
heavy duty work.
yeah, of putting together maps beforehand. And so I went into it thinking, oh, what have I gotten myself into? I don't know how this is going to go. And what I appreciated about you was you just made it really easy, um, really easy to learn, because I feel like
Mm.
for me, I'm not a very geography person, science person. I'm more of like a right brain, English and arts. I was really good at that when I was
Yeah.
in school.
Mhm.
And so this was a little bit of a challenge for me, but you made it really light and fun,
Mm.
with your puns as well. And also I
Yeah.
really appreciated the way that you would take your pieces of your story when we were at different
Mm.
locations. You would just bring little parts of your story in that were impactful to the location that we were at.
Sure.
You didn't just make it about the geography or the
Mhm.
geology, although that was really impactful and helpful. And I feel like I know more about maps than I've ever in my life ever known and understood. And now when I look at maps of Israel, I have understanding of the
Mhm.
land. I know the
Right.
land now just being there that time when I was
Right.
with you. But the other thing I really appreciated about you, Shelley, was when you would just yield to the Holy Spirit in whatever
Mm.
we were doing. And one time I remember particularly was on the Sea of Galilee,
Oh, yes.
because we were going on the Sea of Galilee early in the morning, and I don't
Mhm.
know why it just wasn't. At first, I was thinking, "Why are we going in the morning?" I had this in my mind of, like, how it was
Sure.
supposed to go, and we went out on the Sea of Galilee, and it was like glass because it
Mhm.
was still in the morning,
Yeah.
and I thought, "Okay, this is this touristy thing that everyone does when they go to Israel," and I was looking forward to it, but I didn't know what would happen when we were on the boat, and
Mhm.
for whatever reason, it felt like the Holy Spirit
Mhm.
just hit
Yes.
everyone at the same time, and you were playing your playlist of
Mhm.
music, and you just had it playing randomly, but it was, like, playing the perfect songs, and
Right.
everything
Right.
was just I was so overwhelmed in that moment, and you just kind of sorta got out of the way, I think. I could
Mhm.
tell, like, you had a probably had a plan of where you were
I
going and
did. And that wasn't it.
right.
It wasn't it, but it was so good and it was so right, and I too will never forget that moment because it was so clearly the Lord's leading, very different than how I would normally, spend the time on the boat with
Yeah,
student. Yeah.
yeah, so it was awesome. But I've heard bits and pieces of your story and, was really touched because you've gone through a lot of things in your life, but
Mm, mhm.
I don't know the full story, and, I thought it would be wonderful to have you on and have you talk about it a
Yeah,
little bit.
absolutely.
So
Yeah, I thank you. I appreciate you having me on. Go ahead. I feel like I interrupted you, but
no, no, it's fine. I was just gonna ask you if you wanted to share a bit about your background,
Mm,
kind of like what brought you to where you are today. How did you grow up? What was
mhm.
your faith journey like with the Lord?
Yeah. That's a very, very big question, um, and a good question. But, I guess to get where I am today, I gotta take it way back with, my family. I'm so grateful for the upbringing that I had. Both of my parents, they were first generation Christians and, really loved the Lord, and they made sure that I have 2 older brothers, made sure that my brothers and I were always in church, and I just I just saw their faith as a child. Like, distinctly remember this, one service we were in church, and I remember looking up to my mother, and her eyes were closed as she's singing, the along with the worship, and her eyes are closed, and she had this smile on her face, and I was, like, just seeing her bask in the presence of the Lord that she loved. And even years later, sitting beside her in church, I would still see her with that smile on her face as she's singing to him. And so I had this upbringing in church, which I'm so grateful for. But like many of us, we have these seasons, you know, hiccups, hurdles, hardships, whatever you wanna call them. And for sure, in my teenage years, there were just a lot of, hiccups and much more than hiccups, a lot of hardships. And so I just was wavering in my faith, wavering in life, and, a number of really, traumatic experiences happened, in my world in my mid-teens and toward the end of my late teens. And it was at age 19, God ripped me out of the situation I was in, and that situation it's, too big and too large to go into on this podcast, but it was one where I was just blindly, um, involved in a relationship that was horrible for me. And so I'm 19, and it was as if God just, like I said, ripped me out of that circumstance and, tossed me across the world. I ended up, landing in Sydney, Australia, and I went to Bible college for I thought was gonna be 3 months, and it ended up being 2 years. And at that time was when, you're removed from everything, and you have time to let God kinda take the blinders off. And my life just turned around at that age, and it was a a season I'll never forget. But it was the season, even though I'd grown up in church and I'd seen, my parents model, the goodness of God, to the best of their ability, I chose at 19, "Lord, I'm serving you the rest of my life. I am going to serve you the rest of my life." And so that was a big turning point for me. Little did I know, a handful of years later, I would go through what I think is probably the hardest season I've ever had to walk through, and definitely one that would fall into, what we would metaphorically call a wilderness, um, season in my life, and that was in 2008. So I was in my mid-20s in 2008, and we learned that my father had, cancer, and he ended up having a year to live, which, man, I was looking back, I'm so grateful for that year because how traumatic it might be to lose someone so suddenly, and I haven't had to walk that route of losing someone, in an instant. I haven't had to walk that route, and I know that that would be terrible, but any cancer story is terrible. And so, that season I can't even tell you what it looked like because it felt like so much of a blur. It was the first time I'd ever truly walked through grief. I'd lost all my parents prior to that, but someone so close as my father, it was devastating. So we had that year with him, but then, things definitely turned, and I lost him in February of 2009. And the year following was, as I said, just a blur. I didn't know how to cope with grief. I was just swirling with emotions. I was reaching for anything and everything and anyone that I'm like, "How do I even go through this?" And what I can tell you through that season is, and it sounds so cliche. It sounds so cliche when I say it, but I have never known it like I've known it then. I was carried on the wings of prayer. I knew so many people in my life who said, "I'm praying for you, I'm uplifting you," and it was like I couldn't do anything, and it felt like, this limp body of mine was held in the hands of God, but carried, through prayer. And so somehow I made it through that season, and I'm like, poke my head out through the clouds. I'm like, "There's sunshine again." Grief remains with us in different ways over time, but that first year was extremely, extremely difficult and trying and felt like I was losing myself in so many ways. And shortly after it was about a year and a half after my dad's death, uh, we get the news that my mom has cancer, and I'm like, "Oh my oh my goodness." And I remember thinking, I mean, of course, the wave hits you of like, "Oh, no, not again. I'm not
Mm,
ready to go through this again." But I remember going to my best friend, known her my entire life. Her and her family, her parents, they've carried me, um, through so much. But I remember going to her and saying, "I don't wanna do this season." So knowing I'm gonna go through another wilderness or I'm gonna go through another dry season, I don't wanna do the season the same way I did it with my dad because it just felt so hopeless, that limp body being carried through. And thank God that I was carried through with my dad's death. And this friend and many other friends just stayed by my side in what eventually was 6 months of the rest of my mom's life on Earth. And, they stayed beside me in it, and I was just determined. I'm like, "I know, God, that I cannot do this without you. I cannot do this without you." And so leading up to her death, and especially after her death, I'm very, very close with her, and so it just was a whole 'nother level of grief. After her death, it just again, that that feeling of I can't do anything, like, I feel completely encased, immersed, swallowed up by grief. Um All I could do, it was like the only thing that I could think of was let others do the work for you, basically, and I'll explain that. Other people have gone through trials, wildernesses, grief, pain. They've come out of it. I was in the middle of it. They've come out of it and they've written books about the faithfulness of God. They've written songs about the goodness of God. They've taken their situation and they've crafted this glorious, golden, beautiful piece of wonder. From out of the fire comes this book or this song or whatever it may be. And I just immersed myself in that kind of stuff. I remember falling asleep. I created this playlist and I could not fall asleep without worship music in my ears telling me that God is good. Because when I was in that deep, dark place, you hear a lot of lies, you feel a lot of pain, and you just need someone to remind you, God is good. God will carry me through this. And so, over the course of time, I'm just listening to tons and tons of worship music. I I couldn't even sing it. Like that's literally it felt like I'd lost my voice. I couldn't sing. I'd be in church and I'd just weep. I couldn't get the words out, but I
mm,
let the words get into me. And Uh, and I was just lifted through it, whether by worship songs or, diving into the Psalms, my goodness, just letting the grief of David and his angst and frustration, and then his you see this glimmer of hope at the end of, some of his Psalms. You're like, "Ah, okay, he will not forsake me." and you just hold on to these promises. So I'm getting into the word. I'm just listening to worship and reading books about the character of the Father and the character of Jesus as friend and savior. And I just it was over the years following my mother's death was what truly uh just enraptured me, but also encased me in the truth of God is faithful. He will carry you through the hard seasons. And so that time in my life in my mid to late 20s was extremely hard. And hard not just from the grief, but um I'm not married, so I wasn't married then, never have been married. The pain of seemingly doing it alone, walking through that season alone. I say seemingly because I have a new perspective now, and he gave me perspective over the years, uh,
Right.
realizing I was never alone. Um, and so it was just a very shaping season, probably the hardest, season I've walked through. There have been many other hard seasons, since then, but I would say that is the one of the big ones, and then the journey of really walking out that feeling of, "God, you've abandoned me, you've neglected me, I'm not married, this doesn't desire my heart." Those kind of things, but really walking through that over the course of a number of years, I would say those are probably the biggest moments in my faith journey.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a few things that came to my mind as you were talking. One was I was curious, what was that time like with your parents, that last bit of time you
Mhm,
had?
mhm,
How did you how
mhm,
did you walk through that with your father? How did you walk through that with your
mhm.
mother?
Yeah,
What was that time with them like for you?
mhm. So we got the news that my dad had about a year at best, and that's what he ended up having. He was already by the time he was diagnosed, he had stage 4. It was, kind of one of those cancers that, "Oh, surprise, I didn't realize I had it." And, as I said, it felt like I, got hit with an uppercut, left hook, whatever, all of it. I just felt completely, how do I deal with this idea of losing someone so close to me? And, um, I look back, it's still hard to not ache from it
Yeah.
because I look back on that year and my dad at many points in his life was in the hospital. He was, toward the end of his life in a long-term hospice care, um, and had returned to university in the same town, we were in Denver. I'd returned to university, and so I was busy with school life, and I remember not really knowing how to deal with the grief that, um, I visited him, but I didn't visit him as much as I wish I had, just because I couldn't handle it, and, um, I'm like, "Oh." I have compassion on myself because I know that was such a hard season, but that's why when part of the reason why when my mom got sick, I was like, I don't wanna do it the same. I kinda wanna look it in the eyes, as painful as I know that it is, and walk through it with eyes wide open. And so, I'm grateful for the year that I had with my dad because it gave me time to somewhat process. It gave me time with him. I did have some really precious moments. One in particular I will never ever forget where I'm alone with him in his hospice room, sitting on the edge of his bed, and he's crying over the things that he's sad about missing out on in my life. And it was just like the tenderness of a father having to say goodbye or see you later.
Mm.
And precious moments that I'll never forget. But with my mom and having 6 months, hers too was a state when we found out it was like, "Oh my goodness, it's too late." And again, I'm grateful for the 6 months I had with her. I think even less than 6. But at that time, she was living in South Texas, I was living in Colorado still, and man, the goodness of people, multiple people paid for me to fly down to go see her, like, once a month, and I'd spend, a weekend or a week with her. I spent Thanksgiving with her. Watched her make her Thanksgiving recipes one last time, I was just trying to soak it up and be with her as much as possible. And so it was it was 2 very different routes within the wilderness. But the first time walking through that wilderness, it's like I saw what the wilderness was and what it had to offer and what it didn't have to offer. And the second time through, I'm like, "Okay, I've been here. I made it through. I'll make it through again. I wanna do this a little bit differently." And
Mm. And how did your brothers handle it? Like, when you were walking through that, did you have your brothers along with you kinda
yeah,
going through
well,
that together?
yeah, it was hard on all of us and in very different ways. When my dad died, I was in Colorado, and my so I'm the youngest, my middle brother also lived in Colorado with his, wife and their newborn, baby boy, and so they would come up while my dad was sick, and then, as he's dying, they were so helpful. They would come up, and I remember them coming to help kinda clean out the house and come to visit him and just spend time, and I'm so grateful that they were close by. My oldest brother, though, his family was in Texas, very far away, and they had children as well, and so it was more challenging for them to come up. But then you flip it, and then with my mother was so close to the oldest, in proximity, and they were the oldest was helping take care of her, and it was just like everyone took part in helping and participating as much as we could because the grief was so heavy. And I've had great discussions, with my brothers. And of course, the first few months, the first years, I didn't even really know how to talk about things, to be honest. Um, but I've had a lot of really good memories in talking with my brothers about who my parents were. "Hey, remember when mom did this?" And a lot of it is around, like, their silly, quirky natures. My mom was such a goofball and so adventurous and so wild and crazy, and we'd be like, "Remember when mom" she well, remember when mom used to like, she would we'd go to Luby's Cafeteria, if that means anything to any of you. It's like this nasty old diner in Texas, and she'd be like, "I dare you to eat liver and onions. Take a bite of my liver." And she's, like, gagging, and she's like, "I'll pay you $1." It's just, like, all these fun memories, and I think those are the things that really help to put Band-Aids on our heart because we just remember the people we love, and so I've had a lot of great discussions with my brothers about that kinda stuff. Grief is a beast, though. It's a
Mm,
beast, and it affects people in very different ways, and it affected me as even just in my own journey between my dad and my mom, it affected me in very, very different ways, and so I have a lot of compassion on anyone, who has gone through it or is going through it.
yeah, yeah. This might seem a little random, but when you were talking, I was thinking about, you mentioned 2008, 2009, and then
Mhm.
the fact that you were single. Did you find, because I remember 2008 and 2009 was, like, when the economy kind of
Mhm.
crashed and
Right.
things were really difficult financially for a lot of people. I know
Yeah.
I went through something during that time.
Mm.
Was it
Mhm.
hard for you? Did that add a layer of complexity to your situation, or were you kind of in an okay place? Like, I just kinda wondered
As
about
far as, like, the financial situation,
yeah, like, did the way
didn't
the
have a
econ
whole lot in the bank account at that time, for sure. I was, back in college, so I was back at university,
okay.
and I had, like, a part-time job to help, with certain bills, and my dad was so gracious, that I was living with him in his apartment at that time, and so, in that regard, it's like and that's I don't wanna not say this. When I look back on my life, and I was just reflecting on this at Thanksgiving, when I look back on my life and the hard seasons that I have been through, and even the seasons that have been wonderful, there has never been a time when I haven't been alone. When I, yeah, have not been alone. Did I say that right? I've always been taken care of. I've always been provided for. In some way, God has used people throughout my life to be companions, to be, they've just been incredibly generous in my world. It's been like he has said, even before my parents died, and he says this to every single one of us, but when it becomes real to you, you're like, "Yeah, I will take care of you. I will provide for you. I will protect you." And so I look back on my life and in times like when I'm going back to university, my dad's, I'm allowed to live back with my dad, and that's saving me financially, saving me on things financially. And when I'm going through the hardship sounds so cheap for losing my mom after losing my dad, but when I'm going through that, I had this, and I still do have this, who I call, family. They're not related by blood, but they have known me literally my entire life. The parents have knew my parents. Uh, their children are some of my best friends. And so it's like this whole family has taken care of me and tucked me in
Mm.
their wings, and that was especially needed when my mom was sick and as after I lost her, just to have that, "Hey, hey, we've got you, and we'll support you." And so, yeah, just looking back on my life in every single season, losing recently in the last year, losing my job and being like, "What? I all of a sudden I have to move back to the United States, and where am I gonna live? What am I gonna do? What where am I?" And having a family open up their door and say, "Hey, come live with us while you get your feet back up under you." And so this is a little bit of a rabbit trail, but you bring up 2008 and 2009. Did that affect you? It didn't affect me financially, but it called to my remembrance of, in every hardship, no matter what it may be, financially, losing my job, um, losing my parents, no matter what it has been, the goodness of God has been evident in my life through people who have just, "Hey, let me come alongside you and help you out."
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. That's amazing. So what would you say to somebody who, I mean, what would you say to yourself even, I guess, someone who's going through grief right now or recently went through grief, like what would you say to them? I mean, I think that's the hard part. And for people, maybe even for people like me who maybe we're not going through grief, but we don't really know how to come alongside someone with grief because
Mhm.
it's like you don't wanna say the wrong thing. You don't want to, I guess I'm asking
Yeah.
you questions in that, but yeah.
God. Yeah. I I definitely learned a couple things not to say,
Mm,
and here's the thing, I I look back and some people, especially who have never walked through some kind of grief as deep as losing, someone very close to you, you're exactly right, you don't know what to say, and you don't wanna make the mistake, and you're just like, and sometimes we end up, by default, making, eventually what we realize as the mistake of just not even reaching out at all. And, um, I think the feeling of utter loneliness was probably, one of the biggest feelings, and so when people would do simple things, even just a text that said, "Hey, I'm thinking of you. I'm praying for you. How are you doing today?" Or there was this one woman who used to work with my dad, and this was the kindest thing that I was like, so practical. I think she knew I liked to read. So she mailed me a card after my dad's death, or maybe even prior to, I can't remember when it was. She mailed me a card of like, "Hey, I'm thinking of you, praying for you." And in it was a $20 gift card to Barnes& and Noble. And I was like, and I love to get a chai at Barnes& and Noble and sit and read. And it was just like this, "Oh, okay. That was really, really kind." Very, very practical thing. So those practical moments of like reaching out to people, they're not lost. Um, Expecting someone to get over their grief quickly is
Mm.
probably a mistake many of us have made. I've made it, and I've even walked through grief, and I've kind of been like, "Okay, come on, chop chop, let's get through it." It takes time, and I mean, it takes really a work of God in people's life. It really does take time. And so have compassion on people who are walking through it. What I would say to myself is, and honest, if I was saying this to myself and, 2009, 2011 self was listening, I'd probably be like, "Okay, yeah, right." I wouldn't even listen to it. But what I would say to myself is, "You will make it through. God will never leave you, and just lean on him. Lean on Jesus."
Mhm.
And it's as simple as that. In every single day, I'm just like going through grief, lean on Jesus and lean and lean. Allow yourself to feel, allow yourself to cry. But no, here's the thing that, if anybody no if some of the listeners have never been to the Holy Land. When you visit the wilderness, there's 2 different types of wilderness. You have the one, the Judean wilderness and where you see sheep grazing and, I think you have a picture right behind your head. It looks
Yeah.
like the Judean wilderness,
Yeah, it was when I was there.
yes, I'm like, that is it's an incredible, incredible place. And you'll still see sheep grazing there and goats and modern shepherds. It's such a beautiful place. And then there's one that's farther south, and it is it gets even less rain, and it is what the Bible literally calls great and terrible, that God led them through the great and terrible wilderness. And if you go to either of those, um, you quickly realize, minus the modern plumbing that has allowed for gas stations and allowed for, the aroma coffee shops and, allowed for some housing units over here. Modern plumbing has brought that all in. Minus that, you look at it and you go, this is not a place for permanent settlement. The wilderness, whether the Judean wilderness, where we have, the ties to Jesus's temptation, um, the just this place of, "You're not supposed to live there." Or the great and terrible wilderness where we have the Israelites wandering through for 40 years. You're not supposed to live there. The wilderness is not meant for settlement.
Mhm.
And so I would tell myself, "You will make it through. The wilderness is not meant for dwelling. It's meant to go to, and God has great lessons for us, great moments of testing our trust and our faith. But it's not meant to live in."
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so good. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how the Bedouins live there. When you're talking
There's
to us.
some, yeah, exactly, some modern plumbing is,
Yeah, they have a bit of
they've
help.
got some, most of them have a car or 2 where they can go in and buy some supplies, so it's become quite livable, whereas before it was a place of, seasonal migration, people moving in and out, mainly, shepherds moving in and out. But once you go beyond this, at least physically, what we call, you'll remember this term, the rain shadow, where the rain tapers off, to less than what is needed to grow crops. This wilderness is not a place, um, for growing, sustaining you, not a place for feeding you daily. Yeah, it's a challenging place, but
I
yeah,
remember being
beautiful place.
surprised by the fact that shepherds take their sheep there. I mean, I learned that before I went to Israel, but I remember when I first learned it, I thought, okay, that's not what I ever pictured. In Psalm 23, for example, I never
Yes.
pictured that taking place in the wilderness, but
Right,
you know,
right, or right on that fringe where you're just like, "Is there enough grass for them? Can they actually be fed?" And, like, even as you taper off further into the drier lands. I have this photo that, so we have a mutual friend, Becca, and, I have this photo that she printed off for me uh, as a Christmas present, and it is so amazing. It's a modern Bedouin shepherd in Jordan, and he's like laughing, smiling, standing on this rock, and he's got probably a fraction. He's got a fraction of his herd in from what was biblical Moab. You know, where we talk about the Moabite. And he's got this fraction of a herd of sheep, probably 20 in the photo, and then one lamb right in the middle. And I looked very intently, and I looked, and I counted up all the sheep, and I looked at their heads, and I looked at which ones were grazing. And there were probably 4 or 5 with their heads down. And then you look at the ground, and you're like, com it's all looks like rock and dirt. Where is the grass? You know, where is the grass? And they can find a way to survive on very little. That image alone is something that sticks with me when we think of, God, I'm in this wilderness season. Well, what does the wilderness really look like physically? What can actually take place there? The tenderness of a shepherd leading his sheep to places where at first glance you're like, there's no way I can survive off of that. This is rock and dirt. Look a little closer. He will sustain you. He will always sustain you. It's such a beautiful picture. And, I say all that and it brings to memory, Nicole, when I was going through these wilderness seasons, losing my father, losing my mother, and really, really wrestling with the fact that I wasn't married. I mean, I wrestled with it for years. And one of the things, I said I immersed myself in worship music, I immersed myself in books. One of the things that I did, and even in the last 6 months I've redone, is I did a deep dive on the nature and character of a shepherd. And it is so beautiful and so powerful. Um, I did that probably 10 years ago shortly after I'd lost my parents. And the material I had at the time, it's a shepherd from the US, and so you're getting this US idea of what a shepherd looks like, but many of the principles still apply. And now that I've lived in and been to and studied in the Holy Land, I did a deep dive on Middle Eastern shepherds. Wow. And I have that visual image of what does a shepherd do? What does he promise? Is he really good? Well, what does good mean? Would he be willing to do to protect me? What would he be willing to do to make sure I am sustained in a place where naturally speaking, it looks like I should not be sustained? What would he do to make sure that I get the water that I need to keep me alive for another day? It's a very metaphorical idea, but this is a very real reality when you go to the land of the Bible. And it's a beautiful thing when we reflect on our good shepherd, how he really takes care of us. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so good. Pardon me.
No worries.
Um, so you afterward, your parents passed away. You said you were back in college in Colorado?
Yeah, so I went to the University of Denver, and my dad passed away in 2009 while I was still in finishing up my undergrad. And then my mom passed away 2 years later, almost to the day, so 2011.
Okay.
Um, yeah, February 2009 and 11. And
So
then
what did life look like after that, that period of time?
yeah, so after I was in this kinda transition season after graduating, from university and trying to figure out, "Okay, what do I really wanna do?" Um, and it was in that transition period that I found out that my mom was sick, but I had just so happened to, um, really reconnect with that family I told you about, the family that aren't blood. And so I was working for them and I was, living with them, and then we find out my mom gets sick. And it was just like, wow, you know, walking through it with them was really a gift. Again, God never left me alone, and I was always taken care of. And and so I worked for their ministry, amazing ministry, What Matters Ministries and Missions. They do work in Guatemala and Kenya. And their heart is to rescue orphans and widows. And so I did a lot of nonprofit work with them, a lot of administrative stuff, and going down to the orphanage a number of times. And it was a season that I look back on and wow, 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 wow. It was uh okay. We Another image from the Holy Land. You went in June, right?
Mhm.
How
Yep.
many wildflowers did you see in the wilderness?
They were all dead
They were
when we
dead.
went. Yeah.
They were dead. Okay, I challenge you, go back in March sometime. Go back in March. And you will see purple and pink and yellow, and it's short-lived. It's short-lived because, the amount of rain that they get is short, but or go up to Galilee especially and look at the wildflowers that just spring up, and it's just a blanket of green and color everywhere, purple. One of my favorites is this iridescent pink flower, I mean, it's gorgeous flowers everywhere, and I would say in the years following my mom's death, and working for, this ministry and just really throwing myself into service, whether it's working for that ministry or serving at a young adults, outreach or not an outreach, it was part of a young adults ministry in a church. I just threw myself into serving, and it was wildflowers growing after a very dry season. It was greenery everywhere and, flowers. Not to say that I'm living on cloud 9. No, I'm still walking out the grief and pain, and I'm walking out the wrestle of, "God, why have you seemingly left me alone? Why am I not married? Why don't I have a family? Why don't I look like everybody else? Why don't I look like society says I should look like?" And, but it really was this time of pouring out. And at the same time, God is pouring in so much. This window really from 2014 to 2019, so about 5 years. I used to write a lot. Um, I had this blog. I mean, it still exists, but it's still out there.
Hidden some
Um, what do you say?
hidden somewhere.
It is. It's there. And I mean, I wouldn't mind saying let me just finish this part. From 2004 to 2019, while the wildflowers are blooming and I'm serving, I was so intently focused on letting God heal the corners of my heart that I didn't even know were wounded. Whether from the grief and the loss, I had to walk through this time when I felt like, in losing my dad, I felt like I didn't have that father figure to just lean on and be like, even the simple stuff. "Hey, dad, how do I do this to fix my car?" Or even sharing with my dad, "Oh, I've really gotten into," well, not at that time, "pickleball," and then coming home the next day and there'd be a pickleball paddle, or something else. Just this idea of, like, he's so into my world. And I really struggled with that after losing him, like, "God, I don't have anyone like that in my life anymore." And coming to know the character of God in a very different way. So, over the course of 5, 6 years, I just dove into letting him heal me, but as he's pouring into me and refining me and changing me, I'm also giving to others, pouring out whether in serving the church or who knew that what I would write I wrote quite a few blogs about the grief, about the loneliness, about, being single and still unmarried and wrestling with it. I wrote quite a few blogs, and I was so surprised at the feedback that I got saying, "Wow, me too." Like, this has helped kinda just unlock that hidden area that I have refused to let God into. And so it was a really precious season of my life, that I'm very, very grateful for. And anytime I go back and reread some of those, I'm like, God was so near. He was so present, and he did massive work in me, um, over those years, massive work, and so,
Yeah.
yeah, it really was amazing. So I'm working for this ministry and a couple other ministries in there as well, working for different Christian organizations. It's what I've always wanted to do and just serve the body of Christ, and so, then at 2019 was when I went off to pursue my master's degree, so, yeah.
Yeah. Well, one thing you said some things that really resonated in that you are pouring out at the same time that you're allowing the Lord to heal you. And
Mhm.
that's such a key with walking through something difficult.
Yes.
There are times in my own life that I start to get caught up in maybe something I'm going through, or I feel, especially when you start feeling isolated
Yes.
and you get in your head. And it's like, I feel like the Lord is always reminding me, okay, get your eyes off of yourself and put them
Yep.
on somebody else. Because I feel like when you start putting your eyes on somebody else and you start to pour into other people, or
Mhm.
even be vulnerable with your own story, which is very uncomfortable
Yes.
when you're going
Yes.
through it, um, it really makes such a difference for
Mhm.
others, and then you realize you're not alone
Yes.
because you think you're the only one going through it, but
Mhm.
there's other people going through it.
Yeah.
And so that just, that really, I think that's a really big key for people that are
Mhm.
listening. If you're walking through something like that, you're walking through a difficult time, no matter what it is, look for opportunities to
Yeah.
pour out. I
Yeah.
mean, as much as you're getting poured into, of course.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
so how did you end up getting the opportunity to go to Israel? How did that even come about?
Oh,
You know,
man. It was it felt like, so I'm just living this really great life. Living life, serving, had a good job where I loved what I was doing, and I'm, really involved in church and just going along, and, rewind to, when I was 19 years old, when I said that I went to Bible college, and my life drastically changed. Well, at 19, I finally had this hunger for the word of God, and I was like, "Ooh, I wanna learn." I love learning. I mean, this is a lifelong thing. I just love learning.
mhm,
And so I would read my Bible, and there was a map at the back. I mean, this was before these fancy study Bibles, which I'm all for. But I just had, like, a couple maps at the back, and I'd find myself like, "Okay, yeah," and I'd go to the back, I'm like, "Okay, so Paul was where when he did what? Okay, there's Ephesus. Alright, great." And I loved it, and so I was drawn to not just the geographical, but also the contextual, I mean, contextual, we're talking historical and cultural, and so
layers.
I'm just so
Yeah.
the layers that are so rich in meaning, but you really have to do a little bit of digging in order to find them. So I was really drawn to that at the age of 19. And I remember saying, I kid you not, as I'm growing in this passion for studying the word and wanting to share it with others. I kid you not, I said, you know what, one day I just want to find some tour guide to take me from Egypt up into Israel. So do the stuff in Egypt and then go up into Israel and take me around, but I want them to be really knowledgeable so they can tell me what's happening in all these places, and we're gonna go through there, and then we're gonna go on to, um, kind of mimic in some way Paul's journeys into Turkey and, maybe down over here, maybe into Greece and into Rome. 3 months, I was like, "Let's give me 3 months and I can do it all," and that was this pipe dream of, like, maybe one day I'll get to go over and see the lands of the Bible. Well, that's age 19. Fast forward, okay, what would that have been? What year was that? Okay, so 2019. 2019, I was mid-30s by this point, so 15-ish years had passed, and living life, working for this ministry, serving in the church, and just thriving by serving in the church. And and even leading, I had a women's Bible study. We were studying the books of the Bible in context. We'd study a book, we'd talk about the history we know, and we just worked through them week by week. And so I'm loving it. And all of a sudden, January 2019 rolls around, and I'm taking part in a church does a corporate fast, and I love that. I love fasting. I think it is a huge wow, it's a world shaker for people, for at least, I mean, it's a world shaker for me. But just being very intentional with setting aside certain things and choosing to readopt or re invigorate your life with the presence of God, the Word of God, prayer. So January 2019, I was doing a fast, and I felt something in my spirit saying something's going to change, and I'm like, this. You don't tell that to me who likes to plan things and no, still has, even though I've worked through so much, still has this fear of like, I'm single, Lord. How am I supposed to do stuff in life? What are you going to change? Tell me ahead of time what things are going to change. And at the very end of the fast, I flew back to visit some friends. By this point, I was living in Georgia, so I flew back to visit some friends in Colorado, and one of them was like, "There's this guy at our church who is about to go to Israel to study XYZ. You should talk to him." And I'm like, he said, "What? What is this?" So I go online, I find out what the school is, what the programs they are that offer. I click on one that says historical geography, map lover right here, loving maps since, I don't know, way back. Historical geography, I'm like, the history and geography? Like, of the Bible? We're combining all the things I love? So I look into it, I see what courses they offer, and immediately I'm like, "This is everything I've dreamed of since I was 19." In the recesses of my mind dreamed of, thinking, I just am passionate about teaching God's word in context. I love helping flip the switch on for certain people, as they're studying the Bible. I just love that. I wish I could learn more. That was the desire in the back of my head. Wish I could learn more. And so I would self-study and, do as much as I could, but then here's a master's degree in it. Like, so I look into it. It looks like everything I've dreamed of. I end up talking to my friends about it. I end up talking to my family and saying, "What do you think?" And I very clearly remember someone who I respect his voice in my life saying, "You would be an idiot to not do this." Word
Yeah.
for word, "You would be an idiot." Um, I so respect his voice because he's very much like a father figure, very very in tune with the voice of the Lord, and so um, yeah, so I looked at the dollar amount and was like, "How in the world am I ever gonna do this?" And ended up getting scholarships and opportunities to work abroad and or serve abroad, I should say, as a student. And, it one thing after another, not knowing if I would make it financially beyond 1 semester, I ended up completely making it through to
Wow.
the full degree, 2 years. And I loved it. Hard work, man. It's hard, hard work. It's no piece of cake, but it was so rewarding. And then beyond that, being trained up, uh, I mean, under some of the greats. I mean, I feel like he is as far as historical geography goes, Paul Wright,
Yeah.
being trained up under him and um,
Just in
learning
time too,
just in
because you
time.
kept hiring. So you had like
I know it was this window that I mean it. No, not even that. Let me just try and get the window was that tiny. And
yeah.
again, I look back on my life and I see the orchestration of God. I see it so clearly. And sometimes, actually, I would say almost all the time, when we're in that wilderness season or in that dry season or just like, God, what is going on? We cannot see the quiet movements of God orchestrating our life. And when we walk through it, when we're obedient, when we say yes to Him, when we listen, um, you end up looking back going, only God could have orchestrated this, really. To be there in the final, the final years, studying under really, yeah, I mean, one of the greats, being trained under him, to help, or to learn how to instruct and learn how to take, people in and through the land of the Bible. What a gift. What a gift. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you ended up with a with a position there for
Yes.
a while.
Yeah, so finished my degree, and then in that transition season as he's retiring and the new president is coming in, Oliver Hersey, which I believe you had on your show. As he's coming in, a handful of us were hired on to help, in the administrative roles on campus, and so I ended up working there for about 2.5 years, and yeah, I loved it. I mean, I love the land of the Bible so much, and you'd find me on as much as possible without stretching myself too thin on every field study, going out and seeing a site for the 15th time, and I just never grew tired of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's inspiring for me when I was there. I'll just say that, one of the things, I've talked about this on my podcast, but similar to you, um, kinda walking through that whole, "Why am I single, Lord?"
Mhm.
"Why am I going through this? Why am I alone?"
Right.
I have a husband, but we haven't been able to have children, and
Mm.
so, for me, the wrestling was, "Why am I not a mother? Why
Yeah.
aren't you
Oh,
giving me
yeah.
the desire of my heart?" Like,
Yeah.
everybody else seems to have,
Right.
not everybody else, but when you're in the middle of that,
Yes.
you feel like everybody else can just have children at the drop of a hat, and it's no big
Mhm.
deal. Then you're like, and then the years are ticking by, and I'm
Yeah.
getting older and older and older, and I'm like, "Lord, what's going on? I don't
Mhm.
understand." But when I went to Israel, I had just I was kinda wrestling through some things right before I went to Israel and
Mhm.
trying to make decisions about things, and I was like, "Okay, it's now or never. I gotta go to Israel if I'm gonna go to Israel," kinda thing. And when I was there, I remember, just having you and Becca. I feel like, the Lord just orchestrates everything in such a way. I feel like it was very specific that he had you
Mm.
guys, you both
Mhm.
ladies, like,
Yeah.
lead group, because I was watching you both and being so inspired listening to you as single women,
Mhm.
the Bible, going through all of this information, and I'm like, "Wow, look at what how God is using them, and how he's working in
Oh,
their
it's awesome.
lives, and you have such purpose in your life." And I'm looking at that and just being inspired by that as a woman who has not had everything that I've always
Yeah.
wanted either. And it's cool to see, like, in your story,
Mhm.
you wouldn't be able to, probably, most likely, I shouldn't say you wouldn't, but most likely may not have been able to do what you did if you were married, you
Yeah,
know?
I think about that often. I think about
Yeah.
that often. I'm not saying it's impossible. I know couples have come over to, JUC and studied, they've got children. It's not impossible, but there's a lot more factors involved. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little more complicated.
Yeah.
Um, so a lot has happened since then, obviously.
Yeah.
Saw
Yeah.
you in summer of 2023,
Right.
and just a few months later,
Yeah.
everything changed in Israel,
Yes.
as we
Yes,
know,
it did.
and that your
Mhm.
impacted your job,
Mhm.
evidently, eventually,
Mhm.
to where you hadn't end up coming back to the United States,
Right.
and so
Right.
kind of in your own, um, somewhat of a wilderness in a sense.
Oh, man, it has been a year unlike any other, honestly. It's been a year unlike any other. And I would I would tell you just now after a full year, probably in the last couple months, but especially this month, and I don't know what it is, but I think it's just the grace of God in my life. I feel like I'm finally peeking my head out of the dark clouds of really just wrestling with God. What it felt like my dreams were severed, there's a financial fallout, obviously, when a a war breaks out, and so I completely understand, the result of losing my job, but, we all these questions start to swirl of like, "God, but that my dreams, I feel like you just snip,
Mhm.
and wrestling with that and realizing He's so good. He hasn't abandoned me, He hasn't left me for not He hasn't left me, just dangling out there going, "I have no purpose in life." But it was a very real feeling reality, of what now? I just spent 4.5 years living abroad, and, I mean, culture shock in and of itself, moving back, and I'm like, "Walmart has everything. You need 5 of them, 5 different varieties, just culture shock and moving back, but also the pain of war and wondering what is going on, or a land that I and people that I deeply love and admire and, ache for. Pain of war, culture shock, losing the job. I mean, there was so much,
Hardships too. Yeah.
and yeah, feeling like I had been running 100 miles an hour and and slamming on the brakes because I don't have a job, and I'm like, "Whoa, what do I do? What do I do now?" And so I call it, now that I've been partially through it, a season of forced rest. And again, I'm not the person that just likes to sit back and twiddle my thumbs, sit on my hands, and be like, "La-di-da-di." But it really has been a season where God has said, "Right here, look at me. Look at me. Do you remember my voice? Listen to it again." And I'm going like, "No, I wanna jump. No, I want to." I'm throwing fits left and right. And he's just saying, "Eyes back up, listen to my voice," and not without struggle, not without tears, not without me flailing and throwing fits, and not without very real worries. When you lose a job, there's a very real worry there. And, but it has been this forced rest. And again, gracious people have been so good in my life to help support and care, just care for me in so many different ways, whether literally, physically, it's just really been beautiful. But it really took a bit for my heart to turn from a place of frustration and like, why, to I just want you back, Lord. I just want to be back in your presence. I just want to love you. I just want my faith to grow. I want to serve you. I want to use these gifts for you, but just bring me back to a place of tenderness. I mean, it took months. It really took months, and I think I'm just now feeling the thaw. Um, and I'm really expectant, and I don't know why, but I'm expectant. I'm just like, God has been, looking back on my life, God has been faithful to me. If you've never listened to the song by Sarah Groves, He's Always Been Faithful, and you need a reminder, listen to it. You know, He has always been faithful to me. Morning by morning, week by week, year by year, season by season, death by death, loss of job by in in not I don't wanna say inability. Loss of job to not getting married. These things that were just like the wait, I thought my life was supposed to look
Disappointments.
like disappointments, yeah.
Yeah.
He's always been faithful to me. And that's where I am right now. I'm just reminding myself and going back to that. It's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know you and Becca have started a podcast.
Yeah.
Becca is the other instructor that I had in Israel who I'm friends with. And
Yeah.
you have a wonderful podcast called Of Earth and Stone.
Yes.
What is you have a website as well, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It's of Earth and Stone. I think it's .wixsite.com/info, so it's kinda lengthy,
Yeah, I can
but,
put it in the show notes.
yeah. Yeah, great, thanks. Um, so we have a website, and this came out of the feeling for both of us, because she lived and worked, in Israel alongside me, and moved back to the US at the same time that I did, and so it's just like, we have all of this knowledge and experience, we don't wanna sit on our hands. No idea what will become of it, but why can't we share it right now?
Yeah.
Ideally, I would be in the land of Israel, taking people all throughout the land of Israel and Jordan and Turkey and Greece, Italy. Ideally, it would all be in person, and I could teach it all in person. But for now, there's so much that people can learn, even, just by listening. And so we have some really amazing photos on the website, and a resource page, if people are like, "Where do I even begin with a study Bible?" Or, "Do I
Mhm.
need a Bible dictionary?" Or, "Where do I get an atlas?" Just some recommended resources and, um, just trying to help equip people and maybe open up their eyes a little bit.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. I love it so far. I've listened to every episode
Awesome,
or
thank
that you
you.
guys released. And I think it does make such a difference. If you haven't checked it out, I would encourage you to because when you study the Bible in the context,
Mhm.
all of the different kinds of context,
Yes,
it
yes,
makes such a difference in how you understand it. And
yes.
some things you'll be surprised about when you start to go through, like, oh, maybe I've misunderstood what this meant, or
Mhm.
maybe I had the wrong, because we're in the
Right.
West, we have such a different view of scripture. We have such a a different lens that we look at things
Mhm.
through. So
Yeah.
it's been really, really awesome to get to kind of refresh too from
Yeah.
being in
Right,
Israel, go through material
right.
again, and
Yeah.
I still have all my notes from being in the
Oh,
land and
awesome.
go back to, but and atlases now
Yeah. That's great.
helpful as well. So
Great. Warms
uh,
my heart. It's ju it l studying the Bible is an ever-long journey, and one we couple faith and we can couple, digging and searching out and just growing in our understanding of it, and it's just a never-ending journey, and it doesn't have to be dry, and it can God can reveal remarkable things to us without a map, you know? He
yeah,
doesn't need a map, but it really does help illuminate and set the stage for things, whether a map or understanding how, um, like, the wilderness, what does it even look like? And what is the character of a shepherd? And what just think the stuff that we've all talked about and,
the water. I
the
mean,
water, oh my
it's
goodness,
not
the water
water.
is a huge one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
What
opens
does
our eyes
white
up.
water mean? What is, what are sister?
Yeah,
All of those things that
yeah. The
we read.
cistern is the sibling of the brother. You're welcome. I had to throw it in. You mentioned puns at the very beginning, and I
Yes.
held back. I held back.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's awesome. It's been awesome having you on, and, I do think you and Becca will be in the land again
I
soon.
I do too. I do too. I just trust that, the stuff I've learned, the passions that I have, the heart that God has given me for it, I'm like, it's not wasted, it's not lost, even though I, live in the US now, but yeah, I think one day I'll be back for sure,
Florida, and you
teaching
got
people.
to study too, you got to go to Italy, right? And Turkey,
Yes,
at
so I've been
least?
to Italy a couple times and only once since studying the MA, I've been to Italy once. I'd been prior, but, yeah, I love Rome. I love more than just Rome, but I just love the history and the involvement and, you
Mm.
know yeah. What Paul's stories are remarkable, and when we consider the actually, JUC has a phenomenal, highly recommended class on the life and times of Paul. They don't take you to Rome, but they do go through Greece. Highly recommended, incredible professor, if you're interested in that, but yeah, I just love studying the life of Paul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Shelley. I so
Absolutely.
appreciate you sharing your story.
Yeah, it's,
Um,
you know, it I wanna thank you because even as I tell you, I'm poking my head out of these clouds and have this expectation. I just wanna thank you, even the timing in all of this. Uh, it's just forced me to sit down and reflect on what God has already done in my life. And those memorial stones that we look back on and go, "Oh, yeah, he did that." I went back to my blog, uh, just in these last few days to remind myself, what has he done? Where has he taken me? What has he promised? What has he been faithful in? And the timing couldn't have been more perfect,
mm,
just to prepare for this conversation and to reflect on, wow, yeah, he really has been faithful. It's just reset my eyes to focus on who he is,
yeah,
how good he really is. Yeah.
that's so good. Well,
So
that's
thank
Lord.
you. Thank you for that.
Welcome. You're
Yeah.
welcome, but I feel like that's just the Holy Spirit, like, the
Yeah.
way He pulls everything together and the
Yeah,
timing of it. But
yeah.
I so appreciate you coming on and sharing your story.
Absolutely,
You know,
absolutely. It's a gift. There's much. I pray that there's something in there that is encouraging, to people either walking through it, going through grief, or whatever it may be. That they realize they're not alone, and that God is always with them, and they will walk through.
yes,
Yeah,
that's awesome. Thank you, Shelley.
absolutely. Really
All right,
appreciate it.
talk soon.
Okay, bye bye.